In this episode of Military Strategy, I will be covering the concepts of morale on the battlefield for the soldiers, while things away from the battlefield might affect soldiers on the field, such as war at home and such. I will be covering in this episode specifically tactics and strategies and other things to consider that had morale effects on the soldiers in the field. An important component of a military's morale is often the food. Now, this may seem more as a home field, but it is very important to an army in the field. The reason for this is it affects both their morale and their effectiveness in battle. This is common throughout military history in almost every century. This is often prominent in wars that involve starving out the enemy, like per se World War I with the Entente blockade of German ports. But a famous case of this is the American Civil War, where Confederate troops were often malnourished and did not have the abundance of food and supplies, and this became prevalent at the Battle of Shiloh. Now, this played a big role in the Battle of Shiloh specifically because while troops were also disorganized, while they had looted some of the Union camps for food, they had not been as well fed the day before and the weeks before a battle, and so didn't exactly have the calories to continue the fight and have the energy per se, along with also issues of scurvy, which was commonly rampant throughout the Confederate Army in the Western Theater. Now, another key component in battles, as I previously mentioned before, in this period, formations were often tight, but another thing that is often not looked upon or not discussed much is that while they are in these tight formations, they also are standing face to face with their enemy. They have to load in front of their enemy and stand their ground still. This is commonly why you hear a lot of talk about how militia were lower and how to call a regular unit militia is more or less an insult, because militia were known for often retreating or quickly routing because they couldn't withstand their formation, because they didn't have the discipline as regulars. And this often is a problem with fresh recruits who haven't been per se baptized in fire yet, because they often are used to having to stand their ground, whereas nowadays per se it is more the fear of having not seen the enemy and uncertainty, whereas back then it was mainly the fear of having to still face your enemy and having to stand your ground, and of the imminent death per se, or these high possibility, and that often created fear and is what could easily cause a rout, and often what made charges much more hard to withstand from either infantry or cavalry. Much more terrifying was to have to stand your ground in those cases, because it was you had such a large formation coming at you that was visible to both you and them. Now, another common tactic that was used was raiding. Raiding often in this period was done by cavalry because raids needed to be quick and fast and mobile and maneuverable. Oftentimes these were done to lower not just morale of troops on the field who felt like while they were trying to find an enemy, their own things were being destroyed, but also it caused supply issues in many campaigns, and because raids often were sometimes launched to gather supplies, and what you couldn't gather, you destroyed. This was commonly used in guerrilla warfare, mainly because it was a way for guerrilla fighters to keep fighting and survive. Most notably, wars such as the Boer Wars, the Missouri Theater of the Civil War definitely was a commonplace for such things. However, raids were in the early 18th century and even in the early 19th to 20th century was not considered to be gentlemanly or honorable, and so wasn't often used by major militaries unless truly desperate. So in cases like the Napoleonic Wars, these aren't common until, say, 1812, when Napoleon invades Russia and the Cossacks are raiding their supplies. But this is a different case, as the Russians knew they couldn't completely defeat him in an upfront battle. This is often when it is used to avoid upfront battles, but to still wither away enemy troops. This was also common in the Boer Wars, when Boers tried to whittle away at British supply rails and troops. However, in that case, it failed simply due to sheer numbers and also similar British raiding, except much more extensive, as they had more numbers. Another effective thing about raiding was that it would cause exhaustion, as troops would have to move quickly to counter the raiding, or even in some cases, such as the Boer Wars, while it would be stationary, it would be much more of a manpower drainage, as you'd have to station troops in specific areas, famously in the Boer Wars at blockhouses along the railroads, or in other cases where troops would have to be stationed along bridges, such as famously in the Civil War around Washington, D.C. being heavily fortified. Another important thing to think about with morale on the battlefield is the general themselves and how they present themselves. Not just in propaganda and such, but where they are on the field of battle and how they dress. Napoleon was famous for this with his gray trench coat, not with his fancy uniform, making him seem more common, along with the fact that he often put himself in positions lower, and while he was often on horseback, he often did sometimes was on foot, and so seemed more down to earth, quite literally. Another important thing for commanders is putting themselves in the line of fire. This often helps raise the morale of troops in the field, as it can help make it seem as if I'm not going to put you in a position that I'm not afraid to go in, and so in a sense makes the soldiers feel as if their commander isn't taking a back seat, which I believe this was a common reason for morale being low in World War I, was that the commanders ordering these attacks didn't understand exactly the situations their men were in. And that's another important thing to consider, is on the field, if a commander's on the field or has at least been there and experienced it, they're more likely to understand the combat itself. Thank you for watching. I hope you liked this video and it explained some more things. If you have any more questions for a Q&A video, please drop them in the comment section. And if you like this video, please like and subscribe for more content. And if you didn't, please leave a comment saying what I could do to improve. And thank you for watching.